On behalf of 𝗡𝗄𝗄's History Subcommittee and the Cross-Cultural and Multilingual Research Affinity Group, I'm pleased to welcome you all to our panel titled From 1930s Hollywood to Chasm to the Great Wealth Transfer, a public opinion research story of data, innovation, and the quest for truth. My name is 𝗚𝗹𝗂𝗂𝗃𝗀, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Villanova University, where I currently serve as department chair. I'm also the incoming education chair on the Executive Council of 𝗡𝗄. We have some incredible people on our panel today. Tom W. Smith will tell the story of how the Audience Research Institutes, funded by George Gallup, examined public reaction to Hollywood movies in the 1930s to the 1950s. That polling data helped guide the studio's financial decisions during both peace and wartime. Mandy Shaw will provide an oral history of cognitive aspect of survey methodologies and enduring lessons about asking and answering questions in survey research, with a special focus on how people derive meaning under cultural influences. Cassandra Burton discusses recent survey results on how culture shows up in the ways U.S. families talk and teach about money matters and share financial resources. They enable the public's understanding of financial socialization and the great wealth transfer that we've recently seen in the news. And last but certainly not least is 𝗡𝗄 History Subcommittee Chair Jason Kassakow, who will review the 𝗡𝗄 History Project that better serves our collective history. Let's go ahead and get started. Our first speaker is Tom W. Smith. If you've done any research in the last 5 decades, chances are that you know who Tom W. Smith is. Since 1974, Tom has worked on the General Social Survey. Tom is a senior fellow at NORC and director of NORC's Center for the Study of Politics and Society, as well as the co-founder and current methodology committee co-chair of the International Social Survey Program. A prolific researcher and writer, he is frequently consulted by the news media on topics ranging from American sexual behavior and religion to guns, happiness, and voter behavior. Tom has served as the editor-in-chief of Public Opinion Quarterly and sits on the editorial board of the International Journal of Public Opinion Research, with his work appearing in numerous peer-reviewed journals. Over his career, he has earned some of the field's most prestigious honors, including the 𝗡𝗄 Award for Exceptionally Distinguished Achievement and NORC's inaugural Norman Bradburn Career Achievement Award. So please join me in welcoming Tom W. Smith.
As you can see from the title of this talk is about George Gallup. Being here at 𝗡𝗄, I'm sure all of you know who George Gallup was, but I think you'll learn some new things about him. Here we see Gallup's enterprises, and we see how much more Gallup did than just be the founder of the Gallup poll. From 1932 to 1947, he had a full-time job at Young and Rubicam, a major advertising firm, first as director of research and then as vice president. But while still working for them, in 1935, he created the American Institute of Public Opinion, which we would now know as the Gallup poll. In 1938, he created a second organization, Opinion Research Corporation, which was co-organized with Claude Robinson. But Gallup left after just 1 year. In 1939, after leaving the Opinion Research Corporation, he founded the Audience Research Institute, which we'll be talking about today. Then in 1947, he organized the International Association of Public Opinion Gallup Institutes, the first international organization of Gallup affiliates. And then finally, in 1948, he created a more market research-oriented company, Gallup and Robinson, once again with Claude Robinson. Here we see a picture of those two early pioneers. On the left is Robinson, and to the right is George Gallup. Now, here's what Gallup did about the movies before the American Research Institute, ARI, was founded. The first movie question he ever asked in December of 1936 was, "Do you go to the movies?" Pretty basic starter question. The date of this is interesting. This is just 1 month after the Gallup's triumph in predicting not only that FDR would be reelected as president, but that the Literary Digest would wrongly predict that his Republican opponent would win the election. So he moves into covering movies right after his initial triumph in the election polls. We then see a little down an example of what he was doing, still part of the Gallup poll in early 1939, his Gone with the Wind poll. We see there's questions about the actress who would play Scarlett O'Hara, Vivian Leigh, about the fact that this was based on a book and asking people whether they intended to read the book. They then bring up the very interesting question about whether they would take and watch the movie if it was a two-part movie. And this was being considered by the studio because of how long Gone with the Wind was. And then we get this question, which I particularly like, question 16 down here. Would you rather see it, referring to Gone with the Wind, in colors, or would you rather see if it is not in colors, not in color, but in colors being the nomenclature of the day? Now here's a picture of Hollywood and Vine. Gallup, of course, it was headquartered in Princeton, New Jersey, but he set up a local office at the corner of Hollywood and Vine here. Hollywood and Vine, of course, is famous now because it's one of the center locations of the Walk of Fame. But this is 1940 when he's setting up his office here, over 20 years before the actual Walk of Fame first is started. Okay, ARI, what did they do? They did almost everything you could consider possible in regard to movies. They did tests of movie titles. They did tests of the storyline or content of film. They would take and read out to the respondents a little description of the film, and then they would ask, would you go and see a film like this? They did ratings of the actors in general and as cast members for a specific film. So they would take someone of the period, James Cagney or Randolph Scott, and say, well, do you think Randolph Scott would be a good leading star in a movie playing an airline fighter pilot? They did also things other than their national polls, which assessments of exhibitions and promotion material, and also audience responses to previewed screening of films. These last one, of course, being only done in select local theaters. And they also did questions in general about the movie industry, about regulations, about preference to movies over other forms of entertainment, and so on. They did, for the major studios, ones that you may not remember, like RKO, and some that may still be memorable, like Disney, for a dozen years or so, did hundreds of surveys. But in 1948, with the misprediction that President Thomas Dewey would win the election against Truman, they lost some credibility with Hollywood, and their business declined. They, however, still remained in business until 51, 52, still doing the kind of polls that he'd done earlier. But after 1952, ARI disappears. The brand name disappears. And it appears, although I have not nailed this down yet, that the ARI survey work was taken up by the firm Gallup and Robinson that had been founded in 1948 and continued for some unknown period under that spin-off. Now, in addition to this story, I have a little coda that kind of takes this story of ARI, and brings it down in an interesting way to APOR, to NORC, and to this meeting here in Hollywood, or in LA, about Hollywood. Here you see Paul Sheetsley. Paul Sheetsley was the man who brings this down into the many decades into the future and ultimately to the present. So here we see Paul Sheetsley, and we see in 1940 to 42, he was the head of interviewers for ARI. So that's the connection to the ARI here. But in January 1942, Gallup loaned him to run the New York office. The man who had been running that office had just joined the Navy to take and join the war effort. And given the large volume of government work that NORC was then doing, they needed immediate replacement, and Paul Sheetsley was just the right experienced person to be head of the New York office, which was in charge of most of the field work. Now, in spring of 1942, Gallup asks NORC to return Sheetsley. Ultimately, however, Sheetsley elects to stay with NORC. Now, in that position, in fall of 46, Sheetsley was the secretary of the committee to organize the 1947 Williamstown Conference, and that led to the founding of APOR in that year. In 1968, Sheetsley was elected president of APOR. In 1982, he received the APOR Award for Exceptionally Distinguished Achievement. And then in 1992, the meeting, the history of APOR, A Meeting Place, was published with Sheetsley as co-editor. Unfortunately, he had died shortly before the publication, but had been the main organizer of that history. Now, I worked with Paul in the 70s and 80s, and then in 2020, I edited the second history of APOR, A Meeting Place and More. And the History Committee, which I serve on, has organized this session today. So from the ARI to the present, we see the various paths that brings that topic very appropriately here in LA today.
Thanks so much, Tom. Next up is Mandy Shaw. Mandy Shaw is a research and business leader with more than 25 years of professional experience at RTI, NORC, an academic survey lab, and as an entrepreneur. More about her work and publications are available at mandyshaw.com. A 5-time certified project management expert, she was recognized by APOR in 2024 for her innovative leadership during the most uncertain period of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please join me in welcoming Mandy Shaw.
My presentation today is made in honor of Seymour Sudman, Norman Bradburn, and Norbert Shorts, who co-authored the 2010 APOR Book Award winner, Thinking About Answers, the Application of Cognitive Processes to Survey Methodology. By no means am I suggesting that they are the only people who have contributed to the development of CASM, the cognitive aspects of survey methodology. For example, 𝗟𝗏𝗂𝗃 has often been credited as the founding father of CASM. Here at the APOR conference, we get to meet people like Roger Tourangeau, who applied cognitive models to survey response problems, and many others who led the way from federal statistical agencies. One such influential person is 𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗃. I'm unable to name all the key figures simply because I'm only scheduled for 15 minutes today. You can find more details, interviews, and videos at this APOR webpage shown on the screen. CASM was an interdisciplinary effort between survey methodologists and cognitive psychologists. There was a time when survey methodologists did not have a way to theorize or systematically take psychology of survey response into account in how we design surveys, and factors like education or social status were attributed to as the only or primary influences on question wording. Let me give you an example. Here's the self-administered version from the American Community Survey on Age. Can I get a volunteer to answer this question? Maury? How would you answer this question? He said 83. Pretty straightforward, right? When I conducted cognitive interviews with a Korean respondent in English, almost always they asked me a question back. Do you mean my Korean age or American age? At first I was surprised. What do you mean, Korean age or American age? I mean, don't humans age the same across the scale of time? It turns out that in the Korean culture, you are considered 1 year old when you're in the womb. So by the time you are born, you're 1 year old. Let's say my American age is 25, then my Korean age will be 26 because you plus 1. And I bet if I had interviewed them in Korean, they were probably primed to only report their Korean age because the entire context was Korean. So here, culture and language were drivers, not because the question itself was not delivered as worded, overly complicated, or their age is too difficult to recall. To tell the story of CASM, we must begin in the 1970s when cognitive psychology and linguistics started getting more attention as they migrated from the humanities into science. They are fundamentally different cultures, if you will, from survey statistics. I can speak from experience because my husband is a statistician, and he is trained to only conduct representative testing, such as large-scale field testing, whereas I could be using results from small laboratory testing to inform questionnaire design. So a deliberate collaboration was necessary, and 1983 was the first CASM seminar where survey methodologists and cognitive psychologists formally met. Thanks to federal statistical agencies, CASM took off in the 90s. For example, in census questionnaires and enumeration procedures, they were applied. and NCHS had a cognitive laboratory. BLS hired psychologists, and they had to explain why the Bureau of Labor Statistics needed psychologists. And I have a photo here from BLS's usability testing lab from the 90s. Here you can see some of the equipment from that era. In the 2000s, you can say that there was a methodological shift in how survey questions were pre-tested, and that was to the credit of the CASSANDRA movement. Some of my research for the 2010 and 2020 decennial census looked into how respondents inferred meaning and content of the survey questions from context, language, and communicative norms. Yep, people do that, even in a standardized survey. A great example is the ACS-H question that I gave you previously. Today is answering and asking questions and considering the psychology of survey response common sense. We recently held a book launch social that took place 2 days prior to today's special event. There were 19 chapters and more than 50 collaborators, but I realized that none of us mentioned CASSANDRA. This was perhaps because it is common sense nowadays for survey methodologists to pretest surveys through techniques like cognitive interviewing, usability testing for web surveys, and to examine how people arrive at their responses. And it's also perhaps common sense to consider the role of language cognition and communication. Yet, the reality is that budget, timeline, and advanced planning still dictated whether some studies pretest survey questions at all. So my call to action to the survey methodologists in the audience is to continue to carefully consider the art of asking and answering questions as part of survey science. Finally, just a quick note on the role of culture on survey response. It's not easy or simple to measure culture in surveys. There are usually two proxy measures for culture: race, ethnicity at the individual level and at the aggregate level, country. Some of the response styles in the literature, such as extreme response style, is more commonly associated with certain cultures, while acquiescent response style is more strongly associated with contrasting cultures. And socially desirable responses can be relative. So is item non-response. Now, this link takes you to several recordings on intersections between cross-cultural survey research and cross-cultural psychology that you'll find interesting. Tim Johnson, Norbert Schwartz, and Daphne Oisman's presentations in particular are relevant. What we do know is that there is systematic variance in response styles across cultures, and this is clearly an area to continue exploring. So let's continue the conversation. Here's how to get in touch with me.
Thanks, Mandy. That was a wonderful presentation. Next, we have Cassandra Burton. Cassandra is a senior research advisor at AARP. She serves as a thought leader and subject matter expert for multiple underserved communities, including older African Americans, veterans, LGBTQ+, and people with disabilities. Cassandra's professional experience and research spans more than 2 decades. Let's welcome Cassandra.
I'm so glad that everybody is able to join us today. Today, I'll be presenting research on behalf of the AARP research leads, Angela Houghton, Blaine Americano, and Chuck Rainville, that led this research. And since we are in LA and we're talking about money and wealth, I wanted to share some interesting tidbits to you. Do you all know who the wealthiest actor or actress is via inheritance in Hollywood? Any guesses? There you have it. That's right. Julia Louis-Dreyfus inherited a multi-billion-dollar dynasty. We don't really know the exact numbers, but she is known as the wealthiest actress in Hollywood. Next up would be Anderson Cooper, who inherited approximately $200 million, not just from the Gene Company, but from Vanderbilt Railroads. So for context, there is no Black equivalent in Hollywood, in Black Hollywood. Large inheritances and fortunes are really extremely rare. Most of the wealthiest Black entertainers are first-generation rich. They built their wealth themselves. There are a few notable rich kids that we've all heard of. So you have Tracee Ellis Ross, yes, Diana Ross's daughter, Zoe Kravitz, you have Jaden and Willow Smith. But then you think about, there's got to be some Black Hollywood kids that inherited wealth from their families. So as I was digging, I was like, oh, Quincy Jones' daughter, Rashida Jones. Well, Rashida Jones, it's estimated that her inheritance was $70 million. Again, you think about not the richest rich, but Anderson Cooper at 200 million. And then you think, oh, well, Michael Jackson, he had this huge empire. Well, Michael Jackson's kids at death received about $30 to $35 million each. Now, over the course of the lifetime, it'll be estimated at about 100 million. But again, this is not generational wealth or old money. So to level set a bit around the greatest wealth transfer in history, it is estimated that $124 trillion will be passed down from one generation to the next between now and 2048. Boomers actually hold the largest share. They hold about 75% of that 124 trillion. And the majority of that wealth actually sits within white households. Of that 124 trillion, about 85 trillion will go to heirs. About 14% or 17 trillion will go to charities. Again, for more context, overall, white households typically inherit about 5.3 times as much as Black households and 6.4 times as much as Hispanic Latino households. When you think about all of this information that I shared, it's evident and very clear that the transfer will not be equal for those who live on the margin. And they're for a number of reasons, but the truth of the matter is that when we think about the greatest wealth transfer in history, it will not close that gap. In fact, it is likely that it'll widen the wealth disparities gap. So at the end of this presentation, I'll present you with a QR code where you can access the full methodology of the study that I'm going to talk about, the annotated questionnaire, and some short reports. So this study done by AARP on family, culture, and money was a national survey of US adults 50 and older. It focused on how families navigate money matters. And we wanted to look at the intersection of race, ethnicity, gender, cultural background, and wealth. The study was fielded from July 14th through the 30th of 2025 with a full sample of 2,121 respondents, and they were recruited from the NORC Foresight 50+ and Amplify AAPI probability panels. We also had an oversample of African Americans, Hispanic Latinos, and Asian Pacific Islanders. So let me ask you another question. I know I'm full of questions. How many of you were taught about money by your family or caregivers growing up? Okay. How many of you were taught about bad financial choices like signing up for 12 credit cards at 18 in college in exchange for a t-shirt or a water bottle? Yeah, me too. As part of this ongoing conversation about this massive generational wealth transfer, financial literacy and financial security, we really want to dig into some research and about older adults and try to understand how they are planning for the transfer, their futures at an individual level, what their plans are, expectations and behaviors within family and across generations about money. The first thing that we found out is that most older adults recall being taught as children about at least one money topic, but 25% were not taught about any of the items that we asked about, with Hispanic Latino women being the least likely to be taught about money. Across all of the groups that we looked at, the most common lesson that was learned as children was saving for the future, which was number one for all groups. About 55% of all adults 50 plus said that they were taught that they should save for the future, but not with respect to retirement. They were just taught that they need to put money away. The next most common lesson was about earning money and evaluating prices for the value of the money. With respect to race and ethnicity, 55% of white adults said that they learned about earning money and evaluating prices for value. For Hispanic and Black adults, the percentage was a little bit lower in the 30s. For African American or Black adults, about 37% also said that they were taught that they should create a budget. Now, again, we're taught about these things, but we're often not taught how to do these things, and execution matters. Essentially, people were taught primarily about saving, earning, and good spending, but not a lot about investing, wealth building, debt management, or asset protection, such as scams. In fact, only 7% said that they were taught about estate planning. As you can see from the slide, most older adults share the goal of passing down money to family, but there are racial disparities in financial security and accumulating wealth. In our study, 32% of all adults 50 plus said passing down money to family was one of their top priorities. Another 51% said it was important, but not a top priority. As you can see, for African American people, half said that it is one of the top priorities. For Asian American Pacific Islanders, it's 39%, and for Hispanic, Latino, and white adults, it's about 30%. In another study that I led called Duality, the Experience of African American 50 Plus, we asked a similar question. And in that study, 94% of respondents said it was important to them to pass down financial security, wealth, and assets. While this is important and a priority, only about half of older adults say that they have a will. And when we look at Black and Hispanic adults, it's actually only about a third who say that they have a will. In terms of financial comfort, because we have to talk about financial comfort when we're talking about wealth, about 23% of all adults 50 and older say that they are just getting by or finding it difficult to get by. When looking at the data by race and ethnicity, African Americans and Hispanic Latinos top the list, with about 30% or more saying that they are having financial difficulties, compared to 20% of white adults and 18% of Asian American Pacific Islanders. Cultural background can also shape whether money in families is more about me or we. Asian American, Pacific Islanders, Black adults, and Hispanic adults are more likely than white adults to identify with an approach focused on group interdependence over personal financial goals. So in essence, based on your culture, you can have different approaches to money matters. People can prioritize personal financial goals and value self-reliance and independence, often viewing financial success as a measure of their own personal achievement. Or you can view your financial choices with a focus of group harmony or interdependence, where you pool resources and share financial responsibilities in support of other group members. As you can see from the quote here, which reflects the group interdependence focus, this individual speaks on growing up and seeing family members helping others. Cultural background can also influence how older adults talk about family financial help. When asked, how do people in your family view asking for financial help from family members? Those who are more interdependent are more likely to say that this is not a problem. As you can see from the slide, 30% said that it's not a problem, whereas adults that identify with personal financial goals, only 15% said it's not a problem. Again, if we look at this quote, this is an individual that takes on an interdependent approach, and the sentiment is that you should support your family because in family, you look out for one another. That's what we do. So the data also indicates for most older adults, they would financially assist their own children if needed. But for white adults were less likely than all other adults from the other racial and ethnic groups to say that they would financially assist elder family members, nieces, nephews, and other adult relatives. You could see that across all of the groups, about 50% said that they would help an elder family member, but for white adults, it's about a third who said that they would help. On a side note, there's a part of the generational wealth transfer that we don't talk about enough, and I really don't have enough time to really get into the nitty-gritty of it, but there is a phenomenon called the reverse wealth transfer, and this is where younger generations are passing wealth to older family members, usually to help with healthcare or basic needs, but this is something that is also happening. So we know that talking about money matters is really uncomfortable at times. It's not always comfortable. Here on this chart, we see how comfortable people are about talking to family members about money matters. And what we found, which was interesting, is that African-American Blacks are more comfortable talking about money across generations, more so than any other race and ethnicity. So the data shows that that comfort level crosses whether it is a younger generation family member, same generation family member, and even older generation family members. There's still this level of comfort. When asked how people in their family view asking for financial help from family members, older women were more likely than older men to say it was uncomfortable and avoided. But that doesn't mean that they don't help. And as you can see from these insights, discomfort does not necessarily mean someone will not share money with family members. Compared to men, women more often said that they are more likely to financially help family members when needed. And even among people who share negative sentiments about financial help, older women were about 10 percentage points higher than older men in being very likely to help elder family members, adult children, and grandchildren. So we'll talk about some key takeaways from this study and from what we know at AARP. What we find is that culture identity really shapes what we learn about money. It also shapes how and when we support family members. One of the other things that we have come to understand is that intersectionality in research and data analysis is important because it shows that when we're talking about financial issues, and all other issues, there are multiple stories happening, not just one. The great wealth transfer is very complicated. And so sometimes people are looking at it as all of this money is going to trickle down. It is important to unpack distinct cultural approaches to money matters because this can help build a more nuanced approach to building financial health among older Americans and their families. Our approaches need to go deeper, and we need to really understand the roots of behaviors, thoughts, and actions instead of strategies that simply think that additional education about finances and financial literacy is the answer. Culture matters. So this, I'll share with you some QR codes. So this QR code will take you directly to the research that was focused in this presentation on family, culture, and money. On this page, you will also be able to access the full methodology, this particular slide deck, and some additional reports, as well as an annotated questionnaire. This QR code will take you to a blog entitled "One of the Greatest Threats to Wealth Transfer May Be All in the Family." This is a blog that I co-authored with Julie Miller of AARP's Thought Leadership. She's the director there, and the Financial Health Network. And it just really speaks about family dynamics and how they impact wealth transfer and inheritance. And lastly, this is a study that I also shared a little bit about during the presentation called "Duality: The Experiences of African Americans 50 Plus." And this will take you directly to the study as well. And if you want to connect with me, this is a QR code that you can use to connect with me directly. And last, again, this is a study that really was led by Angela Houghton, Lane Americana, and Chuck Rainfield. And this is our contact information.
Thanks, Cassandra. That information about the wealth transfer was so exciting. And last but certainly not least is our fearless leader, our chair of the history subcommittee, Jason 𝗂𝗃𝗀. Jason is survey director at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, where he oversees survey research on regional economic issues, coordinates the bank's manufacturing and service sector business surveys, and manages custom research efforts. He brings over a decade of market research experience across multiple industries, including roles at Capital One, Ipsos, healthcare, and ComScore, where he developed expertise in both quantitative and qualitative methods. Jason holds a bachelor's degree in political science and history from Winthrop University and a master's degree in applied economics from Johns Hopkins University. He could also honestly do stand-up comedy because he's absolutely hilarious. Please join me in welcoming Jason.
Camille, thank you for that nice introduction. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about all the work that we have been doing over the past year. I hope you've been enjoying the presentation so far. Tom did a wonderful job of explaining some of the history of our field. Mandy did a great job of talking about the multiculturalism that was adopted a few decades ago. Now this just has become a part of the way we think about our research. And Cassandra has done a really nice job of linking it all together about what the future holds for our industry. But I am here today to talk about the work that we've done as a committee over the past 12 months. As you can probably guess, it takes a lot of people to make great things happen. So this slide is all the wonderful people who I have the privilege of working with on our history committee. So Ashley Koenig is our current education chair, and Camille Burge, who had the privilege of introducing me, is the incoming chair. And we have 𝗚𝗲𝗏 on our committee, who is a Hall of Famer in his own right and has a wealth of knowledge and history. And if you've gone to grad school in the social sciences, you've probably used his textbook. Paul Johnson as well, decades of experience, incredibly thoughtful. He's really helped us on some of the technical aspects of our committee. 𝗔𝗂𝗽𝗲𝗂𝗃𝗍, she was a former chair of our history committee. She's been a great resource, great knowledge, and also just really great at brainstorming wonderful ideas to preserve our history. MANDY Shah, incredibly creative, wonderful person, and a trailblazer. She's done so much just to make sure that the history of our profession and also APOR has been preserved. Tom Smith, our history historian, has just been a wealth of knowledge just to making sure that a lot of the information that we do have on our website and that we do publish to the public is correct. And Andy Zuckerberg, who's done a fabulous job, who's also helped tremendously getting some of the logistics done for our website. There are many ways in which we preserve 𝗚𝗎's history. The two primary ones are through our website. So if you've been to 𝗚𝗎𝗃.org, you can peruse the website and you can see lots of information, including our videos, our interviews. You can find different books. You can find past award winners, everything along those lines. And something that we do is to make sure that the information on the website is accurate and it's up to date. The second way that we do this is through interviews. So Mandy earlier during the conference interviewed Tom Gutterbach from University of Virginia for our heritage interviews. So this will be posted on our site within the next few weeks. But these interviews have been going on for the past few decades, have done a great job of preserving those leaders in our field. And we recently launched a new series of videos that aim to get a more regular frequency to make sure that we are talking to those people and preserving the history of those who have made a difference. So as you can imagine, if we want to preserve our history, the history should be correct. And that's something that the committee has been spending a lot of time on our website. For example, the book award winners was inaccurate previously, and we spent a lot of time going through each one and making sure it was up to date and correct. So that way the people who actually did earn this achievement, they were cited correctly. We've also done a lot of work filming and conducting interviews with those who have done great work in our field, either through the heritage interviews or other interviews that have taken place. And some of these videos weren't on the website. So we went through and just made sure that all the videos were available on 𝗚𝗎𝗃.org and also on YouTube. We're also in the process of updating the website to make sure that it's easy to navigate, accessible, and you can find topics that are interest of you. And that's something that we're hoping to get done within the next 12 to 24 months to make just a better website experience for finding all our videos. As you can imagine, it's also important that the links on our website are working and are correct. For example, you've probably seen a recent email that came from our committee member, Andy Zuckerberg, asking if anyone has previous t-shirts. Through all the different technology updates and website updates that have happened, some of the links have broke. So we're in the process of going through the links and just getting all of them fixed, and also including the t-shirt PowerPoint to be updated. So for example, if you click on this t-shirt contest winners here, it takes you to a broken link, and that's something that we're actively working on. So those who are interested in seeing the previous t-shirts will be able to see them. We are also working to make sure that all the history that we create is preserved. For example, A Meeting Place of More was a book about the history of 𝗚𝗎, and it was originally published in 1992 and revised and updated by Tom Smith. Right now, only the most recent edited version is on the website, but we're working on adding both versions. And thank you to everyone who responded to our email from the listserv with their own copies of the original version. That it has been tremendously helpful, and it was wonderful to see how many people within our community care about preserving the history of 𝗚𝗎. The other way the history subcommittee connects with our industry and also our colleagues is how we show up at 𝗚𝗎. So if you went down to the expo hall, you probably saw these wonderful stars with leaders in our field. This picture is of a very surprised Murray Edelman to see that video that he did was showcased there. But these videos and also the stars were created in tandem with Betty and 𝗚𝗎 staff, and also via Tom and Paul on the subcommittee to create the biographies and make sure all the links and QR codes will work. This is wonderful interviews that have been happening over the past few decades. Mandy Shaw, as I mentioned previously, just interviewed Tom Gutterbach for the most recent heritage interview. But these are ways that we do preserve history. However, those interviews usually happen at 𝗚𝗎 and only once per year. And as we know, there's a lot of great history that's made, and we want to preserve that history, and it's important to do so. So earlier this year, we launched a Pioneers interview series. So this series is more frequent and intended to have interviews with those who created innovative methodologies, advocated for professional inclusion, or did groundbreaking work that has really shaped our industry and public opinion. Earlier this year, in tandem with African American History Month, 𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗏 at Everidis, he conducted our first 3 Pioneer interviews. They are on our website and they're also on YouTube. I strongly recommend listening to them. They are fantastic and really done a great job of capturing the early research, both academic, polling, and marketing research that went into African American public opinion. We have more interviews coming up. So in tandem with Pride Month, we are conducting 2 interviews with trailblazers in LGBTQ+ space, so with Stuart Michaels and Ilan Meyer. We have an interview coming out in the next month or so with 𝗚𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗂. And also we're working to set up interviews with leaders in Hispanic public opinion, which will be published later this year. So as you can see, we've been busy as a committee. We've done a lot of time thinking about how to best preserve our history, both making sure it's correct, accurate, and accessible, and also tracking and creating new history by our pioneer interviews. What I'll say is this, history is a collective effort. It's important that we all work together, especially how fast our industry is transforming with artificial intelligence, synthetic data, the current issues we're currently facing. There's a lot of history right now that we're going through that's important to preserve. So my call for you all is to, if you're interested in participating, please share them, join our committee. We are a great group of people and we're always looking to learn from all of you. Thank you for your time. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. This concludes our history subcommittee panel.